Alrighty, what's going on, folks? This is Matt here for Dark One Linux Tech and Gaming Wars, the fusion of Linux technology and gaming, and we are looking at a video that just came across my feed and is simply entitled "Switch to Linux Now." And the original video will be down in the description. This is about a 5-minute, 15-second video, so hopefully it's good. I guess we'll find out. I never know with some of these videos anymore. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're really, really, really bad. So let's find out.
Microsoft recall bad. Recently, Microsoft has unveiled a new feature called spying. Recall, which saves everything you've ever done on your computer so that you can find that random email you sent 3 weeks ago. Now, this new feature has really stirred the pot, mostly because people are worried about their privacy. The big deal here is that after you click agree on that end user license agreement, or EULA, Microsoft could flip a switch and make this feature no longer optional but mandatory. And this is making people worry about how much control they actually have over their private info and how it's used. Spoiler alert.
So he's not wrong thus far. This whole Microsoft Windows recall crap, this is what I've been talking about for a long time with Microsoft, specifically Windows, etc. You don't have the control you think you do. Like their new thing is getting rid of the documentation so that they force you to create a Microsoft account as opposed to like a local account. They hide the documentation for that now. Like, that is super sus. I don't want your shitty account, Microsoft. I just need to do local computing. Fuck off. Shit, even Android allows you to get around some of that. Holy fuck. When you make Google look good, that's saying a lot. But he's not wrong. So the switch to Linux for like me was all about control. Now, I still have like Windows systems and other stuff, but I dabble in them only so I can speak on them with some knowledge as and experience on the platform, not because I enjoy using them. So, it's kind of like people will always say, oh, I don't use Mac, but, I'm using a Mac right there. So it's relative, but like, yeah, Microsoft doesn't want you to control your data. They want to control your data because they want you to become the fucking product, which is essentially where Windows is going. Software as a service. You see it with Chrome OS and all the other stuff. It is very much, you are the fucking product. Push ads to the no end. Microsoft will do it in the browser. They've done it in the browser. They've done it in the file explorer. They're doing it in pre-install apps, even on their clean images. I can speak to that with like down there I have a Surface Book 2 that was a factory re-imaged by me using the recovery image directly from Microsoft, and it has so much fucking bloat on it that I didn't need. Like, it is crazy how much control a lot of these OS manufacturers specifically are taking away from the user. It doesn't matter if it's Google, it doesn't matter if it's Google, it doesn't matter if it's Apple or Microsoft. They're all heading down the same fucking path. And there's a group of people that are like, nah, dog, fuck off my data. Let me decide how I compute. PC. Microsoft wants to say they're the PC people. PC stands for personal computing. How I decide to compute personally is none of your fucking business, Microsoft. Anyway, rant over.
It's almost none. But Microsoft receives so much hate about this feature that they're actually delaying it. No, not shutting it down, just delaying it. Which makes you think about why they're still trying to launch this feature at a later date. Anyway, people are on the lookout for something other than the invasive Windows environment, and boy do I have the option for you. Let me introduce.
So before he gets into, Linux, one other thing is that this has been an ongoing thing since like Windows 8 with Microsoft. You have the dual identity crisis of Windows 8 with Metro or Modern UI slapped together with the classic Arrow UI, and Microsoft not being able to figure out which fucking camp it wanted to go in. Then you had various things with the ads and all that stuff that I previously mentioned becoming a thing. But, updates changing your defaults back to all Microsoft defaults. Oh, it's an accident. Fuck you, Microsoft. You know you're doing it unintentionally. Like, I mean, Google's been caught with similar stuff. Apple, like, this is my platform. Like, you made the platform. Let me use the fucking platform without you dictating how I decide to use the fucking platform. And that's a lot of the problem. So I'm not saying you should or should not switch to Linux. I'm just saying it might be time to look at it as a viable alternative to the other fucking three that are currently out there.
Introduce you to Linux. If you're subscribed to my channel, you most likely heard of Linux, but if you haven't, it's an open source and super customizable operating system, and it doesn't have any bloatware or telemetry like the Foursquared OS has forced upon you. But I must admit, Linux is quite different from Windows in a few ways. You may have seen the many different Linux operating systems, which are called distributions or distros. These are operating systems made from a software collection that includes the Linux kernel, which is the core of the Linux operating system, acting as an interface between the computer's hardware and software, and often a package management system like Flatpak or Snap is used to install applications. If you're moving to Linux from Windows, two distros that will most likely work for you will be Linux Mint or Zorin OS. Mint is a distro that I've personally used before, and coming from Windows, I absolutely loved it. It's super stable, based on Ubuntu, and it's very user-friendly, customizable, and makes sense to a Windows user. While I don't have personal experience with Zorin OS, like Mint, it's highly customizable and has very familiar layout to Windows. It's very stable as well, and an OS I would personally use and very much recommend to anyone coming from Windows. Now let's talk about the drive.
Okay, so distro recommendations, I don't make them. I'm gonna, like, I have my preferred distros, but I'm gonna cater any distro recommendation I ever make to the user. I'm not just gonna give you catch-all distros that are kind of one-offs and stuff as far as like what a person's going to use. I much prefer a direct question of what distro should I use if I'm doing X, Y, and Z as a user. That's what I prefer. Demographics is what I prefer. So yeah, if you're talking specifically new users switching to Linux, Ubuntu-based distros generally are going to be a much more supported flavor as far as Ubuntu Linux distros, and a lot of that has to do with commercial relevance and support and etc. That's fine. I'm gonna say one thing though, he is talking gibberish to most new users when it's talking like snaps and Flatpaks and all this other stuff. There's a myriad of different file installation styles in Linux: RPM, deb, hardgz, source, compile, snap, flatpak, app image. Like, take your pick. So that can get a little confusing to start, but generally he's not wrong. I would personally generally steer people towards distros that will give you the best out of the box experience, as covering the biggest gamut of user possible as far as new users and where they may or may not go. But that's where you get into the weird stuff. Like, if you have new AMD hardware, I'm generally not going to recommend Linux Mint because of what they use for the kernel and that kind of stuff, and how AMD pins certain things to point releases of the Linux kernel, and those usually don't go into LTS based distros, etc. So it's all relative. This is why I don't like making recommendations, because you have to take hardware and user into account. But that does not dissuade the fact that maybe a lot of these people do need to try the alternatives. People will talk up a lot of the Steam Linux market share is 2%, or the stat counter, whatever the OS thing is for online stuff, and it's like 4%. It's all relative, and that doesn't include Chrome OS. And I'm not a Chrome OS guy, but if you're going to count Linux numbers, now Chrome OS is Linux. Just really, really locked down Linux. So again, not wrong. So let's see where he's going to go with this, because it's labeled drive formats, but I guess we'll find out.
drive formats that these operating systems use. Windows uses a format called NTFS, and while Linux can read and write to an NTFS drive, it doesn't work the other way around because Linux uses a totally different drive structure called ext4, btrfs, or XFS. I'm not going to go into the specifics of why it works that way and how these are structured because I just don't think that it fits into the video and it's a little too complex. But I will.
Short version is most people aren't going to care. ext4 is the longest, most stable one that we've had. btrfs, whatever you want to call it, generally has snapshots, etc. XFS, again, you're getting into preference and stuff. There's going to be certain features and functions in each one. Doesn't really matter at the end of the day.
I will explain the process of installing applications on Linux. It's not the same as downloading an application through your browser and then running through the installation window. While there may be a few edge cases to that statement, like
if you're using Ubuntu-based distros, .deb files, that is very much a very similar experience that you can have. Go to a website, download, go to a GitHub, download a deb, etc., etc. But you are correct. Generally, the preferred way of doing it is not the Windows way of installing apps, which is go to a website, download the exe.msi file, install, go through the 75 paces of trying to make sure you don't get random crap installed along with it, and go from there.
Like Steam, you'll have to use package managers like Flatpak or Snap that I mentioned earlier. These are, in a way, an app store for Linux. They manage packages which can be software files or configuration files for those applications. They're also used to deploy software that you find on these package managers. And speaking of software, this may be a determining factor for your switch to Linux.
So that is a very okay. I don't take issue with the package manager stuff that he's talking about. Wording for these people, package manager, they're not most users. Like you're talking to people who to switch to Linux. They're not going to understand package manager. App Store. Again, this is where nuance tends to be a little more important than sometimes we give on broad overviews of Linux. App Store. Package managers are app stores. App stores are package managers. They're basically the same damn thing. As far as Snap or Flatpak, again, you're going to run into a few different types of install formats in the app stores. It doesn't matter if it's a Flatpak. It doesn't matter if it's an app. Doesn't matter if it's a Snap. Doesn't matter if it's Flatpak. Doesn't matter if it's a Deb or an RPM or whatever. If it's from the app store, it'll more than likely get updated and do what it's supposed to anyway. So just roll with it. It's fine. App selection is correct. It does matter. So let's get into see what he says about that.
Thanks. While there are plenty of FOSS apps or free and open source software, there are some that just plain out don't work with Linux. This includes the Adobe Suite and the Microsoft Office Suite. But there are workarounds to these kind of things though. Wine is a FOSS application that acts as a compatibility layer that allows Linux users to run Windows programs in the Linux operating system. Along with Wine, you can also try and find free software alternatives like Photo.
So I never make the recommendation of Wine because the compatibility with Wine is so hit or miss. And we sell it as a catch-all. I'm not saying it's not a great project. It hasn't helped Linux tremendously. Look at Proton with games. It's based on Wine, code weavers, all that stuff is fantastic. It's great. But what I'm saying is it's not a catch-all that it might work. Like if we put these kind of caveats on stuff of like, it might work for you, but probably not the best experience or recommendation. It's a little different than kind of generally how we sell it. It's like, oh, if you use X, you can just throw it in Wine. It's like, nah, it doesn't always work that way, bro. So I do like what he says after that, though. Alternatives. And this is something I've been very, very critical about in the past. A lot of the Linux community sells them as drop-in replacements. They are not. Alternatives are different. End result generally might be the same, but the way you get to the end fucking result is different. Hence, people will understand that it is not going to be the same. Like the end result of what you're trying to get to will be the same. How you get to that goal within the application and the GUI and stuff is going to be different. Again, this is where nuance matters and how you sell things to new users, whatever, and a general audience fucking matters.
Photo P, which I've used in the past and will recommend, as well as DaVinci Resolve, which is natively supported by Linux. You can also dual boot both Windows and Linux if you absolutely need those applications like the Adobe Suite or Office Suite, but not everybody is comfortable with this, so I just recommend using.
I will also make the recommendation that if do not do it on the same. I don't recommend dual booting generally because, especially if you're on a Windows system, Windows, it doesn't matter if it's a different drive. It doesn't matter if it's like Windows generally just doesn't play nice with other operating systems at all. So I generally tend to avoid making the recommendation of dual booting. Like if you're going to go on it, stay on the live USB or, external drive, there's a myriad of different ways to install it and still poke at it. When, like I said, Windows is just Microsoft controls too much, and Microsoft doesn't like playing nice with others, despite how much they say they love Linux.
Using alternatives. But some things you just can't use the alternatives of, like hardware drivers. There are a large amount of drivers available for GPU compatibility in Linux and other hardware, and it's always getting better. But devices like printers need specific hardware drivers that just don't support Linux. And this is the developer's fault, not Linux. Another sore point can be gaming. While many games do natively run on Linux like Terraria, CS2, and TF2, there are some that need a little bit of help. Proton is another compatibility layer that was developed by Valve to allow Windows apps and games to run on Linux as if they were natively supported. It works great, until you try and play a game that requires an anti-cheat. Games like Fortnite that have an anti-cheat simply won't work on Linux because of the way the drives are structured like I mentioned earlier. Again, I won't go into how this works just because it's a little too complicated for this video. But for games that do work, you can use a game manager like Lutris to keep them all in one spot so you don't have to have 10 game launchers spread across your system. Now the last thing I wanted to mention in this video is the terminal.
Okay, so you only need 2 game launchers currently, realistically, for Linux. Most people give them Steam, give them Epic, and give them GOG. Those are the ones that they're going to want or care about. Personally, I'm going to say Steam and Heroic, because Heroic takes care of 3 of your launchers in one, and Valve is its own thing. I hate the catch-all that Lutris tends to be put as. Lutris is not always the fucking solution. I'm not saying it's a bad program. I'm saying it needs to fit the demographic it's meant for. And the demographic it's meant for is as a tool for options that are not available natively on the platform or developed natively on the platform. The reason I espouse Heroic and Legendary and Mini Galaxy and that stuff, those are specific tools specifically built on the platform. So if there are issues that crop up, is solely based on the platform and maybe changes in APIs behind the scenes, how those programs communicate to the back end. That is what I'm talking about. Whereas Lutris, while relying on Wine, which is whatever, like I love Proton and Lutris, like I love all the work that goes into these programs. But again, we should be using it for things like the Rockstar launcher. We should be using it for things like, the random Ubisoft Connect or whatever the hell they're calling it now, Uplay Connect or whatever fuck. EA's shitty app store. Like those are the reasons and places we should be making those recommendations for Lutris. Instead, we're like, install GOG Galaxy. When it's like, okay, like if I want an all-in-one launcher, why the fuck I just use, Heroic? It's already there. It covers most of my gaming needs. And then install Steam. There you go. 2 launchers. Woo! All done. Like, I'm not saying the work they do is bad. I'm just saying we need to put the right solution to people. And I hate the catch-all stuff that we sometimes tend to do. Example, people will say, GIMP's a replacement for Photoshop. And not necessarily. Like, again, it's an alternative to Photoshop. But then again, you can make the same argument that Crit is an alternative to Photoshop. But its demographic is meant for, digital pen artists. and not photography. So like it's all, again, it's relative, but it's like it's relative to making the right suggestions and solutions to the right demographic, which we suck at.
Please, for your own sake, if you're seriously going to switch to Linux, do yourself a favor and learn the terminal. It may seem super intimidating at first, but once you get the hang of it, you realize that there's nothing really to freak out about. Plus, you never know when you might need to use it for something, and you don't want to be totally lost when you really need it. And the last thing is, back up your computer. Human error.
As far as the terminal, if you recommend the right distro, 90% of the time you're not going to fucking need it, realistically. Mom, pop, Joe Schmo, everyday average user that just goes on and wants to go on to fucking Facebook isn't going to fucking care. They're always going to give the computer to the family friend or the tech guy that they know to fix the goddamn thing. So it's a moot point. Like, you can blame the user, definitely. But at the end of the day, that's their choice. Their personal computing choice also is their personal computing choice on how they decide to compute. And if the terminal and the CLI is not the way to do it, then the distros need to know their demographic. Again, it's all about demographic. If it's a Arch-based distro, or if it's like from scratch or Nix or whatever, if you're not catering to new users, then yeah, there's nothing wrong with having your documentation in CLI specifically. But if you're catering to new users like Zorin or Mint or any of these other fucking distros do, and they're like, oh, we're for new users, and all your documentation starts out with the CLI, you're doing your shit wrong because you don't even know your own fucking demographic. That's the reality.
Human error is always a possibility, and things don't go as planned, so if you're moving to Linux, please back up any of your drives just to stay safe. But if you are genuinely wanting to switch to Linux and you want to see the more dark and not so user-friendly side, make sure to go watch this video.
So as far as backing up, that's... Are you talking snapshots of the OS, or are you talking your files? The OS Btrfs has snapshots pre-enabled, so generally that's not a thing. There's immutable distros, there's X, Y, and Z. As you're talking backing up files, well, that applies across the board for every fucking OS at this point. Let's be real. So that it depends what you're talking about. Like, there's built-in tools that fix it, and then there's built-in tools that most general mom pop end users aren't even gonna fucking do anyway. So yeah, that's relative. I really have no problem with what he's talking about. Again, it's a very rapid fire kind of video. It lacks certain nuance that I think sometimes, again, we quickly promote but undersell. But I do like the fact that apparently he talks in another video about some of the pitfalls that can potentially be in Linux. So again, I got no problems with most of what he's saying. Again, it's nuance, I think, sometimes gets lost in some of these videos. That's just my critique of it, realistically. But yeah, if you want control of your OS, Microsoft ain't it, bro. That's pretty. Nor is Apple. Definitely nor is fucking Chrome. So what I will say as far as overall, if you want to put the personal back into computing, your best chance is probably choosing a Linux distro over any other current available offering that is out there. And that's kind of how it truthfully, honestly is. So with that, original link is for the video will be down in the description. You guys know what to do. Comment, rate, subscribe, and you got a Patreon. All that crap is down below, and I will catch you on the flip. Peace.